There is a disconnect happening in this market right now that I find genuinely remarkable. On one side, you have the price, choppy, frustrating, grinding sideways while retail investors stare at charts wondering when something is going to move. On the other side, you have regulators. Actual sitting regulators, the people who control the legal framework for the entire financial industry, saying some of the most constructive things about crypto that have ever come out of a government office in the United States. And almost nobody is connecting those two things. I have been doing this long enough to recognize what a setup looks like before the market recognizes it. And what is happening in Washington right now, in the regulatory agencies, in the Senate committees, in the White House meetings that are happening weekly, is not background noise. It is the foundation being poured. It is the legal architecture being assembled. And when that foundation sets, what gets built on top of it will move fast. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what regulators are saying, what the Clarity Act negotiations actually look like right now, and why this particular moment, this frustrating, quiet, sideways moment, may be the last time you can position before everything changes. Welcome back. I'm the calm analyst. No hype, no panic, just the structure underneath the noise. Let's go. Let me start with the hard truth that most people in this space are not saying clearly enough. The reason big institutions have been cautious about crypto, not afraid of blockchain, not skeptical of the technology, not ideologically opposed to digital assets, is one thing and one thing only. They did not know the rules. They did not know what they could hold, what they could offer, what they could build, where the lines were, or how aggressive regulators would be if they crossed them. That is not a technology problem. That is not a market problem. That is a legal certainty problem. And legal certainty problems, when they get solved, do not produce gradual, gentle upward movement. They produce step changes. They produce floodgates. Because the capital that was waiting, cautiously, professionally, with full intent to deploy, does not trickle in once the green light turns on. It moves with institutional size and institutional speed. And right now, for the first time in the history of this industry, the people who control those rules are signaling that the green light is coming. Not someday, soon. And they are being specific about what it looks like. Here is what is actually being said. Regulators are working with the SEC on a taxonomy, a formal classification system designed to answer the single most important legal question in all of crypto. What is a security and what is not? That question has been hanging over this market for years. It has been used as a weapon by enforcement-first regulators. It has been the source of the legal ambiguity that kept institutional compliance officers from signing off on crypto participation. And now there is active work being done to answer it with a clean, clear, enforceable definition. For XRP holders, that statement should land like a thunderclap. Because the entire SEC lawsuit, the entire years-long legal battle, the entire uncertainty premium baked into XRP's price, every bit of it traces back to that one unresolved question. What is this asset? What regulatory bucket does it belong in? When that question gets answered formally and legislatively, the risk premium that has been suppressing price discovery disappears. Not gradually, immediately. But the classification taxonomy is just the beginning. Let me run the math on what regulatory clarity actually means for institutional capital flows, because the numbers here are not theoretical. Right now, an estimated 27 trillion sits frozen in Nostro and Vostro accounts globally. Pre-funded liquidity buffers that exist purely because cross-border settlement is slow, uncertain, and friction-heavy. Banks maintain these idle pools because the alternative is settlement failure. It is dead capital doing nothing productive, existing only to paper over the inefficiency of a system built in the 1970s. The speakers at the regulatory level are explicitly discussing the shift from T+5 settlement, where a trade could take 5 business days to finalize, and counterparty risk built up in that window, to T+0, instant settlement, receipt versus payment, delivery versus payment, immediate finality on-chain. That is not a minor operational improvement. That is a structural redesign of how financial risk works. The entire counterparty risk architecture of modern finance is built around the assumption that settlement takes time. Remove that assumption, and the risk management overhead, the capital buffers, the clearinghouse intermediaries, the correspondent banking fees, becomes unnecessary. The $27 trillion in frozen Nostro capital gets unlocked. The fees that currently extract value from every cross-border transaction drop to near zero. The friction that makes international commerce slower and more expensive than it needs to be disappears. And the bridge asset that enables instant, low-cost, cross-border settlement between any two currencies on Earth, the one with 100 billion fixed supply, 3 to 5 second finality, and transaction costs measured in fractions of a cent, sits in a structurally ideal position to capture the volume that flows through those liberated corridors. $150 trillion moves cross-border every year. The Forex market alone processes $7.5 trillion every single day. The derivatives market represents 1.2 quadrillion in notional value. You do not need XRP to capture a large percentage of that flow to produce a price outcome that reshapes what retail investors currently think is possible. You need a small percentage of a very large number. And the infrastructure being wired right now, at the regulatory level, at the DTCC, at the bank level, through Ripple's partnerships and acquisitions, is positioning XRP to be that bridge. This is not a prediction. It is the logical mathematical outcome of the infrastructure currently being assembled, combined with the regulatory framework currently being constructed to allow institutions to use it. Let me stack the specific regulatory moves happening right now, because the details matter and most people are not tracking all of them together. Regulators are announcing that perpetual futures, one of the most important and most actively traded products in global crypto markets, are coming to the United States within the next month. This is not a long-term aspiration. This is an imminent announcement. Perpetual futures have existed in crypto for years. They developed offshore, in Asia, in Europe, in the Bahamas, precisely because the US regulatory environment made it impossible to offer them domestically. The result was that billions of dollars in daily trading volume, the liquidity, the market depth, and the institutional participation that comes with it, all developed outside US jurisdiction. Bringing perpetuals onshore into a regulated US environment is not just a product announcement. It is a market structure upgrade. It is the difference between a market that sophisticated institutional players participate in carefully and with caveats, and a market they participate in fully and at scale. It deepens liquidity. It tightens spreads. It creates hedging tools that institutional treasury departments need before they can allocate its size. It is the kind of market infrastructure development that changes who can participate and how much they can deploy. On top of that, regulators are publishing guidance on digital wallets, specifically what kinds of wallet software implicate regulation and what kinds do not. That matters because the threat of regulatory action against software tools and front ends was one of the most damaging aspects of the prior enforcement regime. It made builders nervous. It made investors cautious. It made the entire DeFi ecosystem exist in a gray zone where even the act of creating a non-custodial interface could become a legal liability. Removing that uncertainty reopens the innovation pipeline. And then there is the DeFi dimension. Regulators are explicitly saying they want to create a path for decentralized finance to operate within the United States rather than pushing it offshore or into the shadows. They are acknowledging that there is a spectrum of decentralization and that forcing every on-chain system into legacy categories like exchange or broker, categories that were defined decades before blockchain existed, was never appropriate. The new posture is create a framework that fits the technology rather than forcing the technology to fit the framework. That is a philosophical reversal from everything the industry dealt with for the last several years. And philosophical reversals at the regulatory level are not just signals. They are structural changes to the environment in which capital allocates. Now let's talk about the Clarity Act, because this is the legislative piece that ties everything together, and the current state of negotiations is more interesting than most people realize. The main sticking point right now is stablecoin yield, specifically whether crypto platforms and digital asset service providers can offer rewards or yield to customers who hold stablecoins. The banks want to block this. The crypto industry wants it permitted. And the White House has been convening meetings, multiple meetings over the past month, to broker a compromise. Here is the part that should make you pay attention. The people involved in those negotiations are describing a situation where both sides are somewhat unhappy. And in Washington, that is exactly what a real compromise looks like. When both sides are unhappy, but still at the table, the deal is usually close. When one side is thrilled and the other has walked out, the deal is dead. Right now, the deal is not dead. The deal is being negotiated with White House involvement at a level that signals the president intends to get this done. Patrick McHenry confirmed that the CFTC-related portion of the legislation has already passed out of the Senate committee. The work being done now is getting the relevant bill back for markup in the Senate Banking Committee. He identified stablecoin rewards as the specific bottleneck and said this is the domino that, once it falls, allows everything else to fall into place. Think about what that framing means. One sticking point, one issue being negotiated, one domino, and the people closest to the process are saying they believe it can be solved. That is not a market that is facing indefinite regulatory delay. That is a market that is one negotiated compromise away from the single most important piece of crypto legislation in U.S. history crossing the finish line. And if the current compromise effort stalls, there is still a fallback. The July 2025 House bill passed with 78 Democratic votes alongside Republican support. That level of bipartisan backing does not disappear. If the Senate negotiation stalls, there is a previously passed, previously vetted, previously bipartisan supported bill that can be moved forward. The path does not require everything to go perfectly. It requires any path to clarity. Here is where I want to address the frustration directly, because I know a lot of you have been watching this space for a long time. You have seen the promises, you have heard the catalysts, you have positioned early and watched the price grind sideways while other asset classes moved. And you are wondering whether this time is actually different or whether this is just another version of the same story. Let me be honest with you about what is different and what is not. What is not different? The market will still have volatility. The price will still frustrate people in the short term. Headlines will still create noise. Sentiment will still swing between extremes. What is different? The regulatory posture. The prior administration's approach was enforcement first. Build and we might sue you. The current approach is framework first. Here are the rules. Here is how approval works. Here is what self-certification looks like. Here is the innovation exemption that lets you build without living in constant legal jeopardy. Those are not the same environment. They produce fundamentally different outcomes for institutional participation, product development, and capital allocation. The old turf war between the SEC and the CFTC, where jurisdictional conflict created uncertainty that paralyzed the entire market, is being replaced with coordinated agency modernization. Project Crypto, as it is being called, is described as a historic initiative to upgrade rules and regulations, not just for crypto, but for emerging technologies broadly. The SEC head is on record saying all assets will move on-chain. The CFTC is actively working toward rules of the road for digital commodities. The OCC, the Fed, and the FDIC have jointly cleared banks to hold tokenized securities. These are not soft signals. These are structural changes to the legal environment in which capital allocates. And when the legal environment changes, money moves. Not because sentiment changed, because the barriers that were legally preventing movement have been removed. Let me bring this to the close, because I want to leave you with the full picture clearly in frame. Regulators are defining what is and is not a security. They are building rules for digital commodities. They are bringing perpetual futures onshore within weeks. They are publishing guidance on wallets, DeFi, and on-chain systems. They are creating innovation exemptions so builders can operate with legal certainty. They are explicitly working toward T+0 settlement infrastructure and discussing Ripple's role in tokenized deposits and financial infrastructure by name. Lawmakers are one negotiated sticking point away from passing the Clarity Act. The bipartisan support exists. The White House is engaged at the highest level. The people closest to the process are calling it the domino that unlocks everything else. And underneath all of this, you have XRP, fixed supply of 100 billion tokens, 3 to 5 second settlement, transaction costs measured in fractions of a cent. A company ranked 5th among the most valued crypto firms globally, ahead of Coinbase, with 17 trillion in annual payment volume flowing through its network and partnerships, documented in DTCC patent filings, integrated into TCS Quartz gateway architecture, and piloting card settlement with MasterCard. The price does not reflect this yet. I understand the frustration, but the price's job is to catch up to reality, not to lead it. And the reality being built in regulatory offices, Senate committee rooms, and White House meetings right now is one of the most constructive environments for institutional crypto adoption that has ever existed in the United States. Sometimes the market ignores the setup right before the setup becomes obvious. That is not a reason to doubt the setup. That is historically where the largest moves originate. The legal foundation is being poured right now. Once it sets, the building goes up fast. The only question, the only one that actually matters for where you are when this moves, is whether you are positioned before the concrete hardens. Comment clarity below if you made it all the way through this one. I want to see who is actually tracking the architecture, not just reacting to the price. Stay patient, stay rational. In a market fueled by emotion and noise, we thrive on data and composure. We don't wait for the future. We plan for it.